Good evening and welcome to our November 12th, 2025, Board of Douglas County Commissioners 5:30 business meeting. Paper copies of the agenda are available for those here in person, and the full packet is available on our website. Reviewing our agenda, first we'll consider our consent agenda. There are 3 items on that agenda. After our consent agenda, we'll move to general public comment. We welcome general public comment for addressing issues not on today's agenda, but otherwise related to county business. Given our limited time and the need to have an orderly and efficient meeting, we apply certain rules regarding public comments. We'll do our best to enforce these rules consistently and without regard to the point of view expressed by the speaker. These are the rules. 1, each speaker will be limited to a total of 3 minutes of speaking time. However, we'll accept public comment of any length in writing. 2, individual speakers may not donate unused time to other speakers. 3, all comments must address topics within the jurisdiction of the County Commission. And 4, we reserve the right to mute or remove any speaker whose comments are threatening, aggressively hostile, or belligerent. Campaigning for public office during public comment period is not allowed. We invite you to give your full name and address for our meeting minutes and address comments to the Commission. If we have your address, we can respond as needed. Please also know that comments received by the Commission during our meeting do not necessarily represent the views of the Douglas County government, but we value the input. We don't usually respond to general public comments on the spot, but if you leave your contact information with county staff, we'll try and get specific questions answered. After that, we'll move to our regular agenda. There are 2 items on our regular agenda this evening. The first item is our 2026 legislative statement for discussion by the Commission, and the second is an overview of the appeals process and update on matters before the Kansas Board of Tax Appeals. For each action item, and neither one of those are action items, they're information only, but we'll hear from staff and then take any questions from the Commission, and then both items will open up for public comment. Once public comment is closed, we'll bring the item back to the Commission for any further discussion. And again, none of the items tonight are up for a vote. With that, I'll ask Commissioners if there's any request to pull any item from the consent agenda for further discussion. Seeing none, anyone here at the courthouse like to pull an item from the consent agenda? Anyone online, Sarah? Okay, Commissioners, I'd welcome a motion on the consent agenda.
I move to approve items 1.1 through 1.3.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 4-0. Commissioner Reed is not with us tonight. She is ill, so she wanted to be here for sure. We'll move on to general public comment. Is there anyone here at the courthouse who would like to provide general public comment? Anyone online, Sarah? Okay, we'll close public comment and move to our regular agenda. And our first item is the 2026 legislative statement. Is Jake our staff person on this? Hi, Jake.
Hi, good evening. Jake Broadbent, Assistant to the County Administrator. We have the 2026 legislative statement on the agenda tonight. It's a draft. Little Government Relations made some minor edits from last year, but it's largely the same. And Stuart is here for any questions as well as staff.
Thank you, Jake. Commissioners, any questions on the legislative statement?
I have a question. You indicate it's a draft. When does it turn into a final product?
We're here for feedback tonight, and then it'll come back in a week or two and be approved by the commission, and it'll be final.
If we think of something between now and then, what do we do?
I think you should let us know. And it'd be great to talk about it tonight, because then ultimately the whole commission is going to have to vote on if we add that to the platform or not. But and we should kind of probably pick a date when we want to get that feedback back to get it back on the agenda. But we can certainly, and this is kind of a time for us to sort of discuss, the purpose of the platform and what we want it to achieve. But if you want to add something back in, just let us know, and then we can talk about it as a group. But we really do need to get this approved before the end of the year, because a lot of the legislative events start off pretty early.
Right.
I don't know if you have some things that you want to talk about related to yeah, that'd be great.
While Stuart is coming up here, I had a couple of questions for you, Jake. Don't go too far. Just sort of the format of it, I'll just say I was sort of thrown off a little bit with the first section on the legislative priorities being home rule and local authority. And then in the subsection, it starts again with home rule. And so it just seems like we almost said the same thing twice in that design. I don't know, because one was maybe specific legislation we support. So that's just some feedback for clarity. And the other question, and maybe for commissioners, I'd be interested in if there is support for some of the housing initiatives that we've shared from the 5 counties group, if that was something we'd like to add. So we can talk about that further since Stuart is preparing to give us a rundown, I think, unless commissioners have other questions. Go for it, Stuart.
Good evening. Stuart Little with Little Government Relations. The platform that you have in front of you is built upon what we did last year. I believe it's trimmed down a little bit. And so in terms of timing, it seems like our measuring point has always been having something ready for the chamber breakfast. So whenever that's on the calendar is kind of the first time I think this may be presented to other folks. There are a number of topics and issues that we're going to have to deal with next year. I think what's going on with World Cup is still up. There are some legislative initiatives on property tax, and I feel like the platform addresses a lot of those things. And in particular, the language in here, you referenced some of the housing proposals. Those are all in process being drafted as legislation. There's familiarity with staff and with the rest of us about this moving forward. Housing is always an interesting issue with the legislature. There are a variety of opinions, and we've already run up against some of those as we've been meeting with kind of everybody involved for the last few months. So those are listed or are mentioned here in the report. I'm happy to answer any more specific questions.
Yeah, I was just going to add, we mentioned on page 2, Kansas Housing Advocacy Network and our support for that. And Commissioner Reed and I actually attended the UCS, United Community Services policy breakfast this morning. And that was the whole focus, was the legislation that KHAN has been advocating with a lot of advising from Little Government Relations. So I think there's a lot in that in their proposal platform. And I actually have some great handouts that I can make copies of and give to you all that I brought back today. But I think we tried to strike a somewhat abbreviated balance with that statement, that just continuing to acknowledge that we are members of KHAN. We support what KHAN is doing. But we could certainly get more specific about some of the specific legislation that is being talked about through KHAN, if we want to. And then I was just trying to think back to, was there a reason, an intentionality behind, the double mention of home rule? And I think a lot of that, it could have been an oversight on our part, but I know that just based on the discussions that we've had about, it's going to be a focused session. It's going to be pretty short, and there's certain things that we really want to stay focused on. And that having that home rule authority is really what a lot of it is grounded in.
And really that home rule discussion and the spending and tax lids discussion could maybe be, put closer together, just in terms of that's probably our main concern about home rule being eroded is what the state is interested in doing for our ability to set tax rates as needed.
Yeah, I would advocate for maybe a little stronger language around tax lids, and very specifically what that it will impact local services if that happens. And at some point that, we are either going to not provide those services or there's going to be downstream effects to that. So that would be something, commissioners, that I would advocate, just a little stronger language, because some of the things in Sturry, it might be helpful for you to cover what you're hearing would be actually included in that constitutional amendment.
We have, with regard to dealing with the tax lid issue, we're going to have, we have a constitutional amendment bill out there which would cap the growth, and it would theoretically could go on a ballot this next in the primary, the general election. That has never had the votes to pass both chambers, because it often gets deferred into a kind of the voices of realism kind of take over and say, we've got to have something. If we want to do something like this, it needs to be flexible, set in statute, those kinds of things. So we've at least moved the conversation to where I don't lose sleep over a constitutional amendment, the degree to which a statutory cap would be implemented, what would be exempted new growth, what would it take to modify that, those kinds of things. All of those are on the table. If you will recall, I try to avoid it, but if you will recall the last month of this session, in 2025, where I think we may have sent around to you 4 or 5 different tax plans that were all, there were plenty of them, which when there's that much time and energy on everybody trying to come up with a solution, there's no solution yet. And so going into an election year, they did the things in terms of property tax that they could control last year, which was the statewide 1.5 mils for public facilities and those kind of things that they took off. And that will, the rest of the tax relief burden that legislators continue to articulate is obviously what can we do to limit local government revenue collection, or whether it's appraisal reform. I mean, all those kinds of things are still in the mix, but the constitutional amendment, I feel like always keeping an eye out for, but it's never really gained the support to do something at that level. So we'll continue to do smaller level policy tinkering, I believe.
I sat with Mike Amix this morning for the ribbon cutting at the KU event. One of the things we talked about was the new local government caucus that they're trying to put together, and thought maybe there were as many as 40 folks serving in the State House now that had some local government experience, but that's eroded quite a bit, even in a short period of time, to try and kind of tell the story of what local governments accomplish, and why that has value for the taxpayers when there are so few people serving on the state level that have kind of a real visceral understanding of it. And so I think that might be something that is kind of we're tasked with, or the 5 counties conversation together with trying to make sure that our state representatives understand the value that local government brings to the taxpayers. And there was a great article in the Kansas Reflector. Anybody catch that? About that were 18 core services that are state required, and they had a study that covered 3 of those and how much money counties are losing providing those, 3 of those 18 essential services. And I think that might help elevate the conversation, or at least open some doors to some state folks to try and we can use that as a leverage to talk more about that. So that might be something that staff helps empower us, or teach like how we can best articulate that back when we have the opportunity. That may be separate from legislative priorities, but it's part of our task.
Mr. Chair, it's in some ways perfectly in line here, where we're the conversation taking place about the motor vehicle fee, and that was part of the focus of the legislative post audit that generated the study. And I think even the narrow limit of what they looked at, that's $20 million, I believe, $20 million of local funding that has to go to provide those services. The other thing is, I think I don't know that I saw in the audit, I couldn't find it, but one of those service fees, like the $30 service fee, most of it doesn't stay locally. And I'm not even sure if that was reflected in the calculus, like $27 out of the 30. I didn't see anything that identified this as a fee, but that none of it stays locally. So, yeah.
I think one of
But-
the things that we're hearing from community partners is the rising cost of utility, water and sewage. And so I'm just kind of curious if you're hearing anything, if anyone's kind of addressing the rising cost of utilities.
I have not heard that brought up over the summer, and I'm not sure I ever heard much of a conversation during the legislative session. So no, is probably the simple answer. I haven't heard anybody bringing that up yet.
Okay. Well, I think it's probably just something to put on your radar because it's something that we are hearing from community partners is they're consistently talking about the rising cost of utilities and how they are going to address those rising costs. And it's something that we're also continually hearing from constituents as well as how they are going to address the rising cost of utilities. So if it's not something that you're hearing, maybe it's something to bring up that we are consistently hearing that at the county and the city level.
Absolutely.
And then access to healthy food. We support developing and expanding programs and policies that strengthen local food systems and address food insecurity for vulnerable populations. What does that really look like?
I know there's, Jill, did you want to do this or?
You start and I'll fill in.
Well, I think I would note a couple of things. There is a growing, obviously there's the Douglas County Food Policy Council. There's a network of those around the state. There's actually a bunch of people at a meeting in Manhattan tonight with the Kansas Food Action Network talking about these exact issues. Some of what's happening is about local production, about healthier production, about in other parts of the state, not just in terms of growing, but in terms of grocery stores. That's part of the conversation. There's a lot of things, and you all may be familiar with the Rural Health Transformation Grant, which is part of the state plan to spend about $200 million a year for 5 years. And food as medicine is one of those components, and integrating that into where healthy foods are one of the many ways that can be used to address chronic diseases, not instead of medication, but as part of what the focus is. And so there's a lot of resources that the state's going to start putting in to those kinds of programs, from local production and sale and access to food as medicine. And that's all part, there's at least 2 projects that are in the official grant request that's going to the federal government to fund those. So this kind of sets us up well when the state decides, or when the resources come here. We're probably ahead of a lot of people and prepared about things to do with that. I don't know, Jill, is there something else that?
No, Stuart mentioned this is largely an extension of existing longstanding work that the Food Policy Council has been doing, but also Live Well and the Food Security Community Health Improvement Plan. It's all part and parcel with that work. So I think,
Thank you.
Didn't we have a pretty good bipartisan support for farm to school at the state level in spite of losing some grants at the federal level? So that's one that's been, I think we've had some wins there in the past.
Yeah, the LEAP program, when it was no longer funded, in some ways it seems like, and I only say this because we've done some work with other folks in this field as well, working about particularly farm to school. And that was an area where there was growing interest, and there were, I mean, obviously isolated in some places, but that kind of capacity for healthy food and purchasing from local producers and those kinds of things. The disappearance of the grant from the federal grant, I think there were a lot of people talking about, I think a lot of those kinds of resources and energy have been consumed by dealing with basic hunger related to SNAP and all those kind of things, and then being focused into what is maybe the food as medicine and some of these other initiatives now. And I haven't seen the entire application for the food component that went to the federal government. There may be some farm to school stuff in there as well. I don't know.
I have a question or comment. One of the issues we're struggling with right now is tenants' right to counsel. And in many other areas, the state has made that a statute in other places. It's the city. Very few counties have done it nationwide. Is there any interest in adding that to the list of things we should be pressing for? I personally think it should be at the state level, not the county level.
So Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, but thinking through the components of what's in the housing package, there's been conversation about that, but I don't believe it's one of the items that, and that was a big array of people from around the state, from Johnson County, from here, from in Wichita, having those conversations, and it was talked about a lot. I don't believe it's part of what the package of bills are that they're working on, Jill, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I think the approach right now is it's measured, but it's also has the opportunity to be fairly impactful. So just pulling out the handouts, the electronic version of the handouts, which I'll give to Jake to put in the memo for next week. But it's limiting the amount of time that evictions are on a person's record. So it's after 2 years, those evictions could be expunged once they're fully addressed. Right now, they could stay on your record forever. So that's just one example. And then a lot of the measures that are in the agenda are focused on habitability and providing a little more habitability of housing units, providing a lot more clarity for cities in terms of what they can and they can't do in terms of enforcing the code as it relates to habitability of those spaces, but also some other foundational elements of just clarifying that the Kansas Consumer Protection Act applies to landlord-tenant cases. So the examples that they talked about today were, some fairly egregious examples, but of 2 large complexes in Wichita, and then the one that was in Gardner, Aspen Place, that, the claims that those individuals could have against those landlords should qualify as being in violation of the Kansas the Consumer Protection Act, which would have afforded those folks up to $10,000 in civil penalties, but the Landlord Tenant Act doesn't fall under that. So it's measured, but also has the opportunity to be really impactful in terms of protecting renters today and improving habitability standards. So that's what I would say. I think it could make a great progress towards where tenant right to counsel is oriented. That was mentioned at the end in terms of what are local communities doing to address these needs. But the policy agenda, I think, it's realistic, but it's measured. But I will say, there was a lot of acknowledgement from the legislators there that we probably have another year or 2 before this package gets voted on, but that it has a lot of support for it.
Stuart, there was a recent move to bring legislators back to redraw districts.
Yes.
That has died. Is there a chance that they will redraw districts again in the coming term?
Yes, we're not able to gather the votes to call everyone back for a special session. You've also seen that at least 6 chairs and vice chairs have been removed from their positions as the result of them not voting to bring everyone back. This will be a live issue during the 2026 legislative session. I don't know in terms of timing when one has to get something redistricted and redraw a district before you're doing ballots and those kinds of things. And I'm sure there'll be litigation at the back end. I think I'll be nice about this. When you're trying to accomplish something like this when the legislature is not in session, the risks are theoretical. When we get into the legislative session and people don't want to do things, the levers can be very, very practical. So it may, in fact, even be easier to get this done during a legislative session. I just don't know what kind of timing there may be to get something done and over legal hurdles and those kind of things, but it will be back.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Is that something that interests us at a county level to have on our agenda?
Yeah, that's why I brought it up, is I'm trying to see if that's something that we want to wade into. And, I do think it's about representation. It will probably impact, I must say, I don't like the way the maps are drawn now. So, um, uh, for a large portion of our county being going all the way to the Colorado line is amazing to me. So, I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what other commissioners' thoughts are if we want to weigh in on that on our legislative statement. I think it impacts our constituents, but it and maybe in a way impacts county government.
I think that might be something for us to stew on and to have Stuart kind of give us some thoughts or some suggestions back of how that might be worded if we were to choose to add that to our agenda.
And I guess I'd say, Stuart, if now is not the right time, since we don't really know what we'd be reacting to just yet, if we save our powder and respond to a specific request, because I do think that's, once one comes live in front of the legislature next year. Because I think that is the difficulty, is right now Douglas County is very split up. So I don't know how you can split us up more, but I don't think that's so. But is it ours? But we don't really know what we're reacting to, other than it just being off cycle.
I wonder if that's a conversation that the 5 counties might be interested in, because I think the idea is that populated areas would be the ones more likely to be splitting communities within those 5 counties, probably more than any others. So that might be a useful conversation if it could be had within the time frame we've got.
I think they're trying very closely to state a very nonpartisan issues and to things that specifically impact the county. So when we met earlier, they pretty much already identified that motor vehicle was going to be their main topic for the year, and any sort of opposition to tax lids. And they felt like they needed to keep it very tight, or they would lose momentum.
I'm not sure we would all share similar opinions on that with the 5 counties, for sure.
And I agree, we very well might not, but just with the thought that urban areas are probably more likely to be impacted, but also are currently impacted by the way the maps are drawn.
Yeah. And there may, as I think about this, I mean, commissioners, I have a concern that some of the things that we're seeing at the federal level some of the behaviors that we're seeing at the federal level of legislation or behavior by legislative bodies is going to trickle down to the state level. And there may be some wording that we want to put in there that, and I'm happy to work with Sarah on this. There may be some wording that sort of says we need to honor the representative level of government and the duties that are required of state and local and federal officials. So I'd want to play with that a little bit, but I do think if we don't, I think we're missing an opportunity, or I think we're not totally representing. I would not feel I'm representing all constituents without having some mention of what we're seeing at the federal level and trying to protect that from happening at the state level.
And I would be in favor of that because we have so much change right now. And to your point, Stuart, not knowing, right, what's going to happen until you actually get into legislative session. If there's an opportunity to craft that language now and to move forward with that, I think it's better to be proactive than reactive.
Another topic that we can choose to take on or not take on, but I don't imagine that there's expected to be a lot of traction around a conservation fund, but I know this would be about the 3rd session that it's been talked about anyway. So, and that's Kansas establishing a fund for conservation like all our states around us have, then used to trigger some federal matches for that. I don't know if that's even still the case.
I know the bills been in committee. It didn't advance, obviously, and obviously we're going into the second half of the biennium, so anything that doesn't pass dies. So we'll start over again in January of 2027. But I'm certain that the sponsor of the bill will be engaged in trying to get it moving forward at some level, because she's done that very well in the past. So.
Anything else, commissioners, on this? Jill, Jake, Stuart, Sarah, do you feel like you have some feedback from us?
I do. I think particularly next week, we're going to have a shorter agenda timeline because of the holiday. So maybe, and to give you guys some time to think, maybe we should aim for the December 3rd agenda to put this back, a revised platform back on the agenda for approval.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Stuart. Thanks for being here. Let's take public comment on this item. Is there anyone here at the courthouse who'd like to provide public comment? Anyone online? Okay, close public comment. Any other comments, commissioners, questions?
Thank you for the work.
Stuart, thank you, Jake. All right, we'll move on to our next item, which is an overview of the appeals process and update on matters before the Kansas Board of Tax Appeals. Oh, wow.
Brad and I have been staying, he's been keeping me up to date as to where we are with some of our BOTA appeals, and I thought it might be a topic that commissioners would be interested in getting a little more background on. Really appreciate Brad's work in this space. I know he's recognized as a statewide leader in this work, and his background is really helpful and for Douglas County in this situation. So many people might not be fascinated by this, but Brad and I both really kind of geek out on some of this stuff. So
we do. We have reason to, and I'll kind of show some of the numbers with that. So Brad Eldridge, your county appraiser here. Good evening. It's good to see everyone here. Can I go ahead and do a share here? I'm just sharing the wrong screen, of course. There's a full screen view. All right. Well, one of the three reasons I wanted to put this together, one, we're getting ready to send out tax bills. And so we're going to have some questions from the taxpayers and wanting to kind of equip you with some of the concepts that we deal with as we're setting those values. Also, we have a little bit of a backlog with some of our Board of Tax Appeals casework, and I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what the potential tax liability was with those cases. And with that, one of our peer counties, Riley County, has had some concerns about that, and they're going to have some proposed legislation. So it kind of is timely that we're talking about this on the same night. So I'm going to kind of go into the why on that towards the end of this presentation.
And Brad, by backlog, you mean from the Kansas Board of Appeals, not at our level?
Correct.
Level.
Yeah, we have very rigid timeline that we have to process them here. So that way you guys can meet the timeline for budget. And so, but once it goes to the state level, there were some issues post-COVID, and I'll kind of talk about that as we get into that in real time. But I'm going to break this into kind of our basic three levels of appeals. So I'm going to walk through each one of those first, and then give you a little bit of a performance of what we've been experiencing here, some numbers on that, and then I'm going to work my way towards the Kansas Boards of Tax Appeals so you can kind of see what's going on there. So just as, well, I'm having technical difficulties here. This is odd.
Enter, it just takes a while to load.
Oh, is that the case?
Because it's just, there's a lag.
Right. Not patient enough, huh? There we go. All right. So this is just kind of the page 2 of this presentation talks about the different appeal processes and the different levels. And so the appeal process starts up with us, and we have the 2 informal appeal options once after we mail out our value notices on March 1st. and then also the payment under protest option, which will be available to folks when they receive their tax bill this month. And so we walk through them, and we have a process there. At the tail end of that, if they want to go order a private sector appraisal, they have an option that's called a supplemental appraisal. This is kind of new to the appeal process that came out about 5 years ago. Not too many people take advantage of that, maybe 3 a year. And then at that point in time, the county can either get another third-party appraisal and see if we're in line with that, or we can go ahead and just yield to that appraisal and work with it. If the taxpayer is not happy at that point in time, they have 30 days to get to, I'm sorry.
What does that cost to a homeowner, property owner to have a third-party appraisal done?
For a residential property, it's about $500. For a commercial property, it could be $2,000 to $5,000 roughly, depending on the complexity of the property, even up to $10,000 if it's a very complex property.
I had a question. Do major corporations like Walmart and so forth, do they pay their taxes under protest, or do they not pay?
Typically, they go through the informal appeal process, and typically they go all the way to the Kansas Boards of Tax Appeals every year. And so, and I'll get to that towards the end of the appraisal. I'll give you some more details on that. So if they're not satisfied, they can get to the Kansas Boards of Tax Appeals, and it can take, if it's a lower value property under $3 million, they had that heard within a few months of that appeal process. If it gets into the full Board of Tax Appeals, it could take up to a year, sometimes 3 if they want to combine, or if they want to delay the process, if they want to ask for a continuance on that. If they are not satisfied with that result, they can go on to district court or to the Court of Appeals. And so Court of Appeals would just have them relook at what it was already looked at BOTA. And if they go to district court, it's a de novo hearing. And so it's everything from scratch all over again. And that's very rare for us. I've been here for 16 years, and I've been over there twice. And they were for big box retailers. And so that's doesn't happen too often, but those are the options in that process, the hierarchy of what we work with on tax buyers. So as we're dealing with the options, again, the informal appeals is typically what we work with folks when we mail out their value notice in March. This time of year, we're going to be dealing with December and May as our next 2 options with the payment under protest, and they can only do one or the other. And so if they appeal in the spring, they cannot do a payment under protest. And so they just get one option per tax year. And so with the payment under protest, they can do that with the first half payment, as long as it's done in a timely fashion, or they can do it with the second half payment if they've already made the first, or if they make the full payment, they can engage that process. And so this is just, I have an overview, and this is with your packet, and basically just kind of walking through what we do on our process and our end. We send them a notice of scheduling, and we do most of them over the phone. It's a situation that we kind of transitioned to post-pandemic. We found it was a little bit more efficient for us to process it on our end. And I think it makes it a little bit less intimidating for some of the taxpayers. Sometimes they'll ask for a virtual hearing, or they can come in person if they want to. Some people like to sit down face to face, and we're fine with that. We can accommodate them, but most of the time we do them over the phone. And then we do electronic exchange of information. So if they want to send us pictures, things like that, they can do that. And then we send them out a decision letter, and they have 30 days to file it on to the Kansas Board of Tax Appeals at that point in time. So that's our informal process on the spring hearings. And so this is our history of our appeal volume. It's been about an average of 800 parcels per year. And so that's on 42,000 parcels. That means about 1% to 3% of our total parcel count appeals, which is a very low rate. A lot of our peers in other states are experiencing extremely high volume. I talked to a gentleman that I know down in Austin. He's the chief appraiser down there. They have about 500,000 parcels, and 50% of them appealed last year. And so they're still trying to navigate just the logistics of doing that much. Over Kansas, I think, we typically range like 1% to 5% on appeal volume here in Kansas overall. So, but for me, I feel it's a little bit of a testament to the accuracy of our values, and then also the relationship that we have with the taxpayers, trying to earn their trust on that. I know we don't have 100% customer satisfaction, but we work on that. On the other side, for the payment or protest, which they have available to them here coming up, it's a very similar process. The only kind of statute timeline that we have on this is we have to give them a decision letter within 14 days of our appeal meeting, which also helps us out on the county side because if we owe them money, we have to pay interest. And so it encourages us to process things on a very timely fashion on that. And so our appeal volume on the payment or protest is averaging just, about 205, I think is what it was on that. And that includes on the first half and the second half payments. And so we usually have a majority of this with the December payments. And then we hear those at the end of January and February and try to get those processed all by the end of February. It's important for us. It's important for them, but it's also important for us because then we have the next appeal season starting in March.
So I was not surprised to see the jump in appeals from 2021 to 2022. I was kind of surprised to see that number has been falling both under the informal appeal and the payment under protest for the last couple of years in a row. And I guess that surprised me because we still hear a lot from folks. And well, when I hear from people, I say, you should file an informal appeal. So I've been sending people your way.
Yeah, and the adjustment ratio on that is about 50% on the spring informals. And then I ran the stats on the payment or protest, and we actually adjust more of those. It's like closer to 70-75%. And so those are just random statistics, but that's what they run on average. There's no intention on adjustments. We just look at the facts and work with them on that.
And are those always adjusted down, or could that go either direction once you look at the facts again?
We cannot legally increase the value at the appeal hearing.
Okay.
They put a law into place about 3 to 5 years ago that wanted to protect taxpayers, that they wouldn't have an extra burden if we discovered information that would go against them.
It's good to know because we do hear from folks about that. And I just want to make sure that, there's no liability if they do decide to put in for an appeal.
Yeah. And so, in that real time situation, if we catch an error that's in the taxpayer's favor, we cannot remedy it then. But, if they have a 2,000 square foot finished basement and we had it as unfinished, we will correct it on our record and it'll be reflected in future year value. And so, but that's fair and equitable with everybody else on the tax bill. So our purpose of the tax appeal is just to always make sure that our values are accurate. And so we kind of replicate what the Kansas Board of Tax Appeals does. They're on a fact-finding mission. And so we're just there to collect information from the property owner, make sure we have good information on our records, and then see what their concerns are and make sure that we have addressed them in our valuation. And so a lot of times it comes down to issues with property condition, things like that, things on the inside of the property that we may not have had privy to that information. And so we have in the Constitution, which Stuart was talking about a little bit ago, with that tax lid that they were talking about, that first that first element of the Kansas statute is talking about assessment, and it has to be uniform and equal. And it charges the legislators with providing law to create uniform and equal assessments. And so we try to reflect that and emulate that here with all of our valuations. So we look at vertical equity on values, the highs and the lows, and then we also look at consistency among neighborhoods. So it's a big important part of what we do. So this is just additional information. If you're working with the taxpayers, and I'd like the public to know, when they come in, we have 30 minutes scheduled to talk about it, to gather all the information. And so usually we open up by listening to the taxpayer, and then we are prepared to explain everything about our valuation. And so we can be as basic, or we can geek out really bad with the statistics and some of the data that we work with. Each year right now in this marketplace, we work with about 900 to 1,000 residential sales that happen within the prior year. And so we're doing a deep dive on the statistics of what a bathroom is worth, what a bedroom's worth, and things like that. And so we do a detailed analysis, and we'll share that with folks if they want to see that. If not, we can kind of just show them general information on what the price points are in their neighborhood and things like that. So if they're not satisfied that here at the local level, they can go up to the Kansas Board of Tax Appeals. It's free for residential taxpayers if they want to take that on. And then it's up to $500 for a commercial taxpayer. And so they have a tiered based on the valuation, what number of billions of dollars that's involved with it. But if it goes up to 10 million and above, it's $500 for them to file. This is a point of contention. We may see some proposed legislation on this because the Board of Tax Appeals is having a tough time keeping up with things and keeping within their budget constraints. And Since they are behind on their docket, they're trying to staff up and process that and get caught up. And so you might see some legislation and activity on that this year. There's two different divisions: a small claims division, which handles properties that are less than 3 million. And that's usually your single family properties. And sometimes we'll have folks that would like to have agricultural use, and that would go through a small claims process as well. If they're not satisfied with those types of results, they can go on to the regular board. They call it the regular division, and that consists of an attorney who's the board chair, a certified general appraiser, and a CPA. And so you have 3 different perspectives on that, and they'll hear those matters on those different properties. So I do have a summary of our appeal volume to the Kansas Board of Tax Appeals. On average, we're seeing about 57 per year on the small claims. And at BOTA, we have about 42 filed per year. And so if you think about the small claims hearing, those are typically 30 minutes long, but it'll take us at least 4 hours to prepare for that, because we have to prepare an exhibit and exchange that in advance, and then also have our testimony and presentation down to have that presented within 10 or 15 minutes of that allotted time. And so that does take a lot with our staff. And so if we see a spike in that, that does take a lot of our staff resources. With the regular BOTA, it's mostly commercial properties. And so talking about your big box retailers, the Walmarts, the Targets, Kohl's, things like that, those folks appeal every year. And typically they do not provide us anything at the appeal hearing here locally. They'll have the attorney talk about the concerns about the value, but we don't receive any tangible information usually here. And so what they do is they'll stack those up. They'll appeal every year, and then they'll continue them until they have a bulk of several of them to be heard at the same time. So for example, today I had follow-up closing briefs for a matter that we had with Walmart. That it was heard back in February, and they had a tough time finding somebody to do the transcripts. We don't always get transcript, but sometimes the attorneys ask for them. And so it took 6 months for them to find a court reporter who would actually transcribe them, who speaks property tax. And then it took us a couple months to do that. And then we have to split the tax or split the bill with the taxpayer, even though we didn't request it. And so that's an extra expense. And then after we go through, that's a really good read too. I got a couple copies of those downstairs if you want to read through those. But I put together a brief on those. So we had 6 tax years on the Walmart at 6th and Wakarusa, and then 2 tax years for the Walmart down south here on Iowa. And so that's 8 tax years combined that we heard that week. And then we have to put together the briefs. And so I sent those to the attorney this afternoon, and they submitted those because they were due today. But that's a lot of time resources for us to put those together. One of the things that we've been very fortunate, and I'm going to show you here on the next slide, in recent years, we've had above 80% success rate in defending our values. And so that does affirm that, the methodology that we're applying here is appropriate. Even when we've gone over to district court, we've had our values affirmed. Most recently, we had all 4 Dillon's properties appeal on 3 tax years. And I had to go up there for 7 days and do testimony and do rebuttal. They had 2 appraisers that they hired, one from Kansas City, one from Chicago, that we went up against, and we prevailed. So we're in a good spot right now. It's not always going to be this way, but I feel like with the market conditions that we have and the data and the processes that we have here at the county, we're able to present that well before the courts on that.
So Brad, I think you said this. I just want you to clarify, but for these big box stores especially, they are not paying their taxes. Instead, they're not doing a payment under protest. They're doing this other method instead. So we don't get anything until it's gone through the entire process.
They still have to pay their tax bill.
They do.
And
Okay.
This is the concern with that proposed legislation that Riley County is going to put out there. For example, on that Walmart out at 6th and Wakarusa, the oldest tax year is 2019. And so if there's a value adjustment, we have to pay interest. And there's each year we get an interest schedule, and it's different for each year, and it compounds. And So if there is an adjustment, it can be a pretty substantial amount that the counties and all the other taxing units have to pay back. And on that matter, it's a 2019 case. And so their concern on that is that in several of those cases, the taxpayer isn't presenting any kind of substantial documentation to justify or to bring just cause on the matter. And so they're going to try to get some legislature out there that says, hey, if you haven't provided something within 1 year that substantiates your request, then the county is not going to pay interest. And so we'll keep an eye out for that. We have the Kansas Association of Counties meeting here in a couple of weeks. And so I'll hear more about that and I'll hear from Jay Hall and see if there's some traction on that and see where they're going on that. So with that, we have several cases not heard. I have 116 matters that have not been fully adjudicated through VOTA. And so there's several years stacked up that are coming up. The small claims, they get to those pretty quick. They're mostly big box retailers. We have several coming up recent years with apartment complexes and some local banks that have taken their matters on. And so my last slide, I've broken down, this is a very rough estimate of what the potential tax liability is based on what they've been asking or what their track record has been on asking on the different appeals. And so and this includes the Walmart matter that's pending right now. That accounts for, between all taxing units, $800,000, $900,000 of potential tax loss if they get exactly what they're asking for. And so, so it's very important for us to try to put our best foot forward when we're defending these matters. And like I said, I think we're very fortunate right now that we have good data sets and we have a good track record. And I feel like our legal representation on the big boxes has been really good. I've been working with our new attorneys, Mark Haddad, and then I've also been working with Brad Frankeldye. He and I have had a good success at district court and with the Kansas Board of Tax Bills on the big box. And so it's important for us to keep on with that momentum. But I mainly want to give you guys a heads up on this because if you see some roll corrections and things coming through that you guys have to sign off on, and you're wondering like, man, why is this interest rate so high? This is why. And so it's something that we kind of have to brace for going forward.
Yeah, I was going to add that I think, oh, I just lost it. Never mind. I totally forgot what I was going to say.
That's fine. That's the summary for my presentation, really. I mainly wanted to kind of give you guys a good heads up of what's pending out there. And so that way, if you saw this coming down the pike, that it wouldn't catch you off guard on it. And also the general public, the other taxing units. I gave our attorney and Mr. Finkeldye a copy of this, so that way he could share this with the county commissioner or the city commissioners. I haven't shared it with anybody with the school board, but I think these are important times with the sensitive budgets right now.
I remember what it was. Many counties, like I think the thing that's I'm really grateful that we have Brad on our team to help us with this, because in some counties, like they don't have the resources to be able to prepare and they have a Walmart too. And so I don't know if there's anything you can talk about, like how this works statewide, or what is that, what are sort of those discrepancies county to county?
Most of the counties don't have the resources to do this. Even the big counties, Johnson County and Wyandotte County are short staffed right now. They have, Johnson County has like over 300 backlog. And so if you can imagine if they did one every day for the next 2 years, that would be just Johnson County. And so they're in the process of stipulating and meeting folks in the middle on those because they don't have the time or the human resources to litigate them. And so you can only imagine if you've got several hundred of these, it just compounds really quick. Same thing's happening in Wyandotte County. Our other peer counties that are in the Big Eight, they don't necessarily have the human resources on staff. And so they typically meet in the middle and stipulate something lower. And so there's refunds issued. So we are in a fortunate situation right now.
The Walmart figure you mentioned earlier, is that out of the 1.5 million or the 4.6?
It'd be out of the 4.6. So
okay.
The county's portion of that would be roughly 300,000, 250 to 300,000.
Thank you.
And for some of these open appeals that you've mentioned for some of these bigger retailers, like you mentioned, Wakarusa, Walmart, have any of these retailers in the past like received tax incentives to come here and open a store, and then now they're appealing any of their property taxes? I'm just kind of curious how that relationship works.
I'm not aware of any, but in that list, the Berry Plastics Distribution Center that's out on the Farmers Turnpike, it had a 10-year tax incentive. And then as soon as it went back on the tax roll, they appealed. They didn't, and that was last year. Last year was the first full year back on the tax roll. And then this year they've taken it on to BOTA. And so, we're not too far off. We're about 10% off, but it's a $30 million property. So that adds up quick too.
I would say that I believe, Brad, so correct me if I'm wrong, in our Neighborhood Revitalization Act boilerplate language, they are not allowed, since that's a rebate, if they've done a payment under protest or something, that they can't appeal, or they can't take it to BOTA. I think we had some language in there that tries to.
I think if they have their right to appeal is preserved, but I'm not sure if it goes further than that.
But then their
Yeah.
rebate is also suspended.
Yeah.
I think is what, because we can't take away their right to appeal, but we can not give
It
them
freezes the
rebate.
funds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I had kind of a similar question. Like, so it sounds like some companies, especially kind of big box ones, like it's a known entity that what they're going to do to fight property taxes. So are those parts of the conversation when an entity wants to come to town? And if there are incentives talked about, is there language that could be used there to have them play fair, at least in terms of like the interest part?
With the payment in lieu of tax contracts that we did out here in East Hills, those payments are set. And so for 10 years, they have a rigid payment schedule, so they're not going anywhere. There's ones that are, I believe that we have a couple that are in Eudora that have the tax incentive, and it's based on a 50%. And I believe they still have their appeal rights preserved, but they've never have. But in terms of new businesses, when they come in, usually the new ones that have been building, like US Steel and, Standard Beverage, everyone else that had done those big projects in the past 10 years, they all involve a tax incentive program. And so we usually don't hear from them because they're getting a preferred treatment there already.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is, most of our programs have not been towards retail big box. So, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the big appeals is retail big box. And there haven't been a lot of tax incentive programs. I think there were some talked about, like for Lowe's or Menards or something, but they haven't really put in place because really just that retail sales doesn't generate enough to qualify for things like Catalyst and those other programs. So, and I know that there are things in statute that say we can't prohibit people from appealing.
Yeah.
Sarah, when we do lose an appeal judgment, interest and the taxes that go back, does that come from fund balance?
So, most of the time we take it off of the next year's tax bill. I believe this is outside of my area of.
It's a little bit outside of my purview too, but I mean, if you were dealing with 2019 tax year, that's gone. That ship has sailed. So
Right.
I don't know. They'll have to.
It's a
to
very
deal
tough
with it,
calculation
yeah.
in the treasurer's office. I could get that. We could do some
Yeah.
follow up on how that goes, how we do that.
It's a very complicated calculation because each year has a different interest rate and it goes to the day. And so if it's mid-year, it's compounding daily. So
It's great when we win.
yeah.
Yeah. I was just trying to understand where the funds would come from if we lose that appeal.
It would probably, and it might just be factored into how we factor next year's budget. I would say, we budget for, why is my brain?
Delinquency rate?
Yep, that's what I was looking for. So my assumption is as long as we're under that delinquency rate, it's probably not impacting the amount of revenue we're planning on. So it may not even hit fund balance.
I think maybe Mr. Chair is talking about like when you cut the check back for that, like where does it come from? Like how is that accounted for in our budget?
Generally, some of those cash clearing accounts happen in distribution before they hit your budget. is what I'm trying to say. So because this is the city and the school money is not our money. So there's a whole calculation in terms of tax distribution that happens before that you guys don't even really see those total cash amounts. Because I show you just what the county has. But I can get some clarity for where the interest payments, but I think for just the county piece, I couldn't tell you like I want to check and see if we distribute that interest to those other entities or how that works. So, but we can find out for you on that.
Thanks. Any other questions, commissioners? All right, I appreciate the presentation. We'll open it up for public comment. Anyone here at the courthouse like to provide public comment? Slow down. Okay, no. Anyone online? Okay. We'll close public comment. Any further questions, commissioners?
I did have one that I wrote in my notes, and it's kind of just tagging on to something that you mentioned in passing, because I've had people call and ask they want to be classified as an ag use, but they're rural residential or something like that. Like, what do you look at that classifies as an ag use? Is it whether they're filing a Schedule F on their taxes? Is that something that you look at, or is it just looking at the uses and you decide?
We have about 8 different criteria that we look at. Schedule F does help substantiate that ag classification, but our main goal is to observe actual productivity on that property prior to January 1st. And so if they're doing some kind of agricultural production or animal production, something out there, then we can see that. We do have a detailed list of agricultural use criteria on our webpage. If you look under appraisal process, there's a downloadable PDF. And other important parts of that is how we delineate residential components versus the ag components. And there's been a little bit of confusion of that lately with folks filing ag permits, which through our planning and zoning office, that makes them exempt from filing fees, review and inspections, and then also, meeting certain building codes. And then they may not be using it as ag use, but then also vice versa. They may use it as residential or residential accessory. And so, we went through a situation recently where we worked with the taxpayer and they wanted ag use. They had all the documentation to substantiate ag use. But they lost the residential classification on what we thought was their garage, and we now list it as a barn, and it's at 25% assessment rate instead of 11.5%. And so in that situation, the door did not swing in the favor of the taxpayer. The overall assessed value kind of came down for some of the components, but the others went up. And so sometimes it's sliding things that offset each other.
All right. Thank you, Brad. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. That ends our regular agenda items. We'll move on to appointments. And I noticed that we have an appointment for Grant Township. I would recommend we wait on that until Commissioner Reed is here and not vote on that without her, if that's okay, commissioners. Any other appointments? I don't think we have any others.
I had a couple of questions about some of the things on the list. So we have on the top one, the building code appeals, 2 positions, and one of those got filled. The other one says it's eligible for reappointment. I don't know that I can find any information on that person, because I imagine if they're willing, we'd probably be very strongly considering their reappointment. So if that's something.
Jake and I will follow up on it.
Okay. Board of Zoning Appeals, still working on that. And there was another one. Oh, I had a question about the CJCC position. Is that somebody that is term limited, or somebody's not interested in serving?
It's a position we've struggled to find somebody to fill it.
Okay,
So it's been an open spot for a period of time.
thanks.
I'm gonna look up some other ones for you as we get into the new year and give you some of those too as well. I would also say, like, the Treatment and Recovery Center Advisory Board, they're reworking how that board's going to work. So we may not fill those right now. And you're going to hear more about that when Bob brings you the Crisis System Steering Committee. So I'm not really worried about it at this time.
At some point, we'll have another appointment for the Burt Nash Board. Maybe
Yeah,
that's something you can
that's
get
what
back
I'm
with
going
us.
to look up.
Okay.
I know I've got some terms expiring in the new year, but not till next year.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to Commissioner and Administrator Miscellaneous, and we typically start with Sarah's memo.
Thanks, commissioners. Just an updated set of dates on the scheduled items. I do want to note as we move into the last few meetings of the year, there is still a lot in flux. So please don't hold me to anything that's on this as being that's the date it's going to happen. I'm getting lots of requests to move things around. So just it might not all hit at the time it's going to hit right now. So that's what makes me nervous about putting it on this, is that I've moved the Boston Crossing Comp Plan Amendment 3 times this week. So we'll see. I want to get closer to the event before we get stuff in, but we are getting close to the end of the year, and I know I've got staff trying to get things done. That's all I have, commissioners.
I have a request. If I could get more than 3 business days on the fund balance policy, it would be nice.
Yeah, you mentioned that to me earlier. I'll do my best. It might mean it's not on that agenda because we're still working on it as staff, so it might not hit that agenda then.
I'm just saying whatever agenda it's on.
Okay. Yep.
If we can get it quicker rather than
Sure.
later.
Any other miscellaneous items, commissioners?
I want to mention for New Boston Crossing, I'm taking a fair amount of emails and comments from constituents. And so I went ahead and met with Kirsten Judd with Sporting Kansas City. And her and I sat down and talked about the plan. She presented the entire plan that Sporting Kansas City is working on with the developer to me. We met for about 2 hours where she overlaid the entire plan with me. I also had the opportunity to speak with Brad Finkeldye as well in regards to the plan. And there is an interest in having a community conversation before the New Boston Crossing Comp Plan Amendment comes back to the Board of County Commission. And so Sarah and I have discussed this. And so looking for a neutral facilitator that might be interested in bringing advocates and the developer in Sporting Kansas City to the table to have a community conversation around this, just so that this version of the plan can be presented back to the community since it has changed so many times. And advocates can have their voice heard and all parties can come back together and see what this plan looks like before it comes back to the governing bodies. And it does look like the city's in favor. So I would just be curious what the commission thinks about having a community conversation prior to it coming back to the Board of County Commission.
My first reaction to that is that the item, and I watched it last night, that was before the Planning Commission was for a comprehensive plan amendment, not a specific project. What I'm hearing you say, Commissioner Anderson, is something that's a specific project. So are you thinking that changes will happen to the comprehensive plan amendment before it comes to us? Because it's already been passed by the Planning Commission.
Which the amendment?
Yeah, the comp plan amendment.
I don't think there'll be changes to the comp plan amendment. I think what Commissioner Anderson's trying to go for would just be a general community conversation in general about the project.
Oh.
So, but it's a little bit of chicken and egg here. Both bodies are going to be asked to make a vote on at least a facet of an eventual project. And if we can, they might ask questions that might, is it about the project or is it about the comp plan amendment? So I do think there probably the community conversation will probably be more about the project, less about the comp plan, but they're related.
They are related.
Irrespective, though, of what happens with the comprehensive plan, isn't the city in charge of project approval?
Yes, my understanding is that our approval of the comp plan is one factor, only one factor of several factors that are considered when reviewing the project. So whether or not both the city or the county approve the comp plan doesn't necessarily mean the project is, denied.
Yes, I'm thinking of, there are a lot of lines kind of being blurred and I'm maybe struggling to pull the pieces out. And one thing would be, I think it's sometimes hard for governing bodies to separate like what's before us at the moment, which would be that comp plan amendment when it comes, as opposed to the project, because some things promised won't pan out. And so like trying to kind of stay in that lane for that meeting. And I'd be a little afraid of like suggesting that we had a role in that project that would be different from what we would actually have as far as county goes, as far as a conversation that's led with the city, that maybe that's a different conversation. And the other one is we have the Wakarusa Vision Plan conversation that's coming on the 20th. And my fear is that this project or comp plan amendment will kind of overshadow some of our ability to have a community conversation about a bigger picture for the Wakarusa Valley. I don't know how we get around that. If we had a meeting specific, or if someone had held a meeting specific to the project, would that help or hurt? I'm not sure. I don't know that there's any getting around it, that a lot of how we talk about the Wakarusa vision is going to be kind of overtaken with this one piece of property within a large river valley. So I didn't answer any of your questions, but those are some of the things that I'm weighing.
Yeah, and I understand. And I don't believe that the intent is to have a conversation about this before the Wakarusa. I think Wakarusa conversation would happen first. And I do wonder if pieces of this will come up, right, in that conversation, possibly. Those that I've talked to already have also said that they think that this will possibly come up in that conversation. And they don't know if it will dilute that conversation also, right? And so maybe this could potentially be a follow-up to that conversation if there are more individuals that would like to continue having conversations about the comp plan or about New Boston Crossing. But in speaking to Brad, he absolutely thought that this was a good idea to convene the parties, because the last time this conversation was had about New Boston Crossing was Q1 of 2024 and possibly October of 2024. And it appears that the land within the city, like the land planning committee, convened these parties to better understand what the challenges were from all involved, and then to glean from that so that they could bring it back to the planning department and incorporate some of those challenges.
I think generally in the past, it's up to the applicant to organize these types of meetings. Since as a commission, and I get this wrong occasionally, I don't know on comp plan amendments, but on many land use issues, you as a commission act in a quasi-judicial fashion. So you will have to disclose ex parte communication again in that meeting. And so it's probably not appropriate for us to coordinate that community forum, but I've never seen a governing body say less community feedback is good. So I would say, but it's really, I think if the applicant organizes something, that's great. And those are generally always looked upon favorably, but it's generally not our role to facilitate, organize, coordinate. unless it's in a public hearing, which is normally at Planning Commission or something that the commission calls for. Does that make sense?
It does, agreed. And that's another thing I've said, that I don't want to
Yeah.
take the role. I'm not a facilitator, I'm not a convener, I don't want to convene. But if those parties are interested in convening and finding a facilitator, supportive of them doing so and
Yep.
convening people to have the conversation. But I also wanted the city to weigh in too,
Yep.
and to understand if they were also supportive in bringing the parties together
Yep.
to have the discussion.
Always a good idea.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to be able to manage separate conversations between this and the Wakarusa corridor study. I think they're probably going to overlap, and maybe that's a good thing, because we have something very tangible, in the design that we can start to see what this means. I would just say I appreciate the clarification there, as long as we are not convening, because I think that's what we're doing whenever this item comes to us. And please let us know when it is, because I'd like to listen. Yeah. Anything else, commissioners?
I've got a few things.
Yeah.
We may not have noticed this, but I think there were 3 of us today at the dedication and ribbon cutting for the conference center. Anyway, while there, I ran into a couple of KU administrators who indicated that the boathouse issues continue to exist. Bircham Park was cleared well over a month ago now, and I think about 3 weeks ago, Mr. Allen asked all the people on his property to leave. Well, since then, many have come back, both to Bircham Park and the Allen property. I talked to Chief Lockhart also at the same meeting today. He said one of the issues in Bircham Park, and they're continuing to run patrols over there, and he confirmed that many people have moved back. But he said a good job of clearing out the brush wasn't done. So people are moving back into their concealed locations without a problem. I've heard Mr. Allen approach some of the people on his property again and ask them to leave, and some of them were rude to him. So he's somewhat unhappy. That's what I've been told. I haven't talked to him directly. Anyway, I just wanted to make other commissioners aware that we may be having an issue in the future on the Allen property. We don't have jurisdiction over Bircham Park.
Staff is continuing to coordinate between the City of Lawrence Homelessness Response Team and the Sheriff's Office and Police Department, and we're working together pretty seamlessly. I think at this point, everybody's engaged and we're all working really hard to try to address the issue. So.
Hang on, let me look at to see what else I had on my list. Oh, financial policy, I already addressed that. I understand there was a meeting with Bert Nash yesterday. I'd like Patrick and Erica to give us their take on that meeting.
Thought it was a good meeting. I think we talked about some communication possibilities of how to improve communication. I think we are continuing to work on service agreements, and we'll hear more at our next when they come. I think is December 3rd. I didn't see it.
Tentatively looking to have them come in December to the commission.
I would say they encouraged board engagement, Board of County Commissioner engagement with their board meetings as well. We talked about communication, opening up lines of communication. I would say from a commissioner perspective, I did offer up my support to our entire commissioner team, but also to Bert Nash and to Sarah as well. From a commissioner perspective, being newer and not being as, I'm going to say, like aware or educated around all things Bert Nash, and Jean, knowing that you've sat on the board, I did offer my support to anyone on the team if anyone needed a mentor or any sort of support in deliberations or facilitation or mediating as we move through some of these challenging conversations. And so our commission is aware, Sarah's aware, Matthew's aware, Kirsten's aware as well. And so I think as we move forward in communication, lines of communication are continuing to open up, and as we engage with their board as well, board to board, as we discussed, leader to leader, I think those lines of communication will continue to improve.
We also had conversations. I know a lot of commissioners have a lot of interest in what's happening here and want a lot of engagement. So that's part of the issues. We can't have a serial meeting, can't have the same conversation with each commissioner individually. It's a violation of the open meetings law. So we talked a little bit about that too. That's different. They have a much larger board, so those issues are a little bit different for them. But so I do think we're going to continue to try to get more information to you all as we go through this process. And I know we've got a lot of things we need to discuss and deliberate on in the next couple months.
My only comment is at some point, I think the county, Bert Nash, and the state need to meet together. If more money is needed, the state needs to be involved.
Duly noted.
Other items, Jean? Okay.
No, that's it.
Okay. Commissioners, anything else? All right, we are adjourned.